Across Africa, domestic violence is the most prevalent form of violence against women, but the authorities often see it as a family matter. There is a deep cultural belief in Nigeria that it's socially acceptable to hit a woman is to discipline a spouse. Domestic violence is widespread and shows no sign of lessening in Nigeria. According to survey, 1 in every 3 respondents admitted to being a victim of domestic violence. The survey also found a nationwide increase in domestic violence in the past 3 years, from 21% in 2011 to 30% in 2013. The report also say that in 2012, National Crime and Safety Survey demonstrated that 31% of the national sample confessed to being victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence takes many forms, including physical, sexual, emotional, and mental. Also, traditional. Common forms of violence against women in Nigeria are rape, acid attacks, molestation, wife beating, and corporal punishment. The Nigerian government has taken legal proceedings to prosecute men that abuse their women in several states. There is currently a push in Nigeria for federal laws concerning domestic violence and for a stronger national response and support for domestic violence issues. Another form of violence which has received a lot of recent attention in Nigeria is acid baths. Acid baths are actions of violence where the perpetrator throws acid onto his or her victim's body, resulting in disfigurement and possible loss of eyesight. Acid baths are a large issue for women that needs to be addressed. In 1990, a former beauty queen rejected her boyfriend's attempt to rekindle their relationship. In retaliation, he threw acid in her face with the words,
"Let me see how any man will love you now."
In this episode of Matter Africa, there are so many questions today that Miss Cynthia MBAMALU, who is the program manager, Yaga Africa, will be answering on the topic domestic violence.
Good evening and welcome to yet another interesting episode on your favorite TV program, Matter Africa, on television Nigerian. My name is Blessing AKPERA, and today we'll be discussing domestic violence. What are the issues of domestic violence? What are the causes and how we can salvage the situation in Africa? I won't be discussing this alone. Today with me is Cynthia MBAMALU. She is the programs manager of Yaga Africa. And welcome to our TV program, Matter Africa. But today we'll be discussing domestic violence. But before we go to domestic violence, we want to know what Yaga Africa is, what it stands for, and what they do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yaga Africa is a civil society organization that promotes democratic governance, human rights, youth participation in politics, and accountability.
Having said about Yaga Africa, it's really an interesting organization that builds, for me, it builds and really promotes the youth and then justice and social violence against not just the youth, but for also the government at large. what now can we say is domestic violence, and why is domestic violence prevalent in Africa?
Yeah, I think domestic violence, it covers different acts that is being perpetrated against an individual, from a member of a family, for instance, someone in a relationship, normally a close member of that person, a close relative or someone close to that person, and mainly in private relationships. So you'd see there's a violence that could be public and there's one that could be in private. So domestic violence is usually those acts that could either cause harm or becomes a form of abuse on whoever is the victim or the person in at the receiving end. And it doesn't just cover physical abuse, for instance. It both covers issues that could cause harm or damage to someone's health, affect the way both emotional and psychological state of the person. So violence in itself is beyond just causing physical harm or damage. It has to do with even how you have how your act has made the other person receiving it, the victim, to react, either to feel fear or to feel less than human. So whatever act that is perpetrated that could cause harm or damage to someone, either physically, psychologically, emotionally, health-wise, that to me is domestic violence, and usually perpetrated within a home or by a close relationship with that is in a private sphere. And when you ask why I think when you ask about it being prevalent in Africa, I don't just think it's an Africa thing. I think it's something that cuts across board, because you look at different communities, you still have instances of domestic violence, even in the Western communities. But usually research has shown that it's more prevalent in developing countries, or where there's still a lot to be done when it comes to enlightenment, education, and social economic challenges, for instance. There's always research that shows that. So sometimes you wouldn't want to separate domestic violence from the socio-economic realities in a community or society, because somehow they are all interconnected. But I think within the continent, one of the things you'd want to look at is, one, maybe you look at where we're coming from, our history, and you'd want to look at the patriarchy we have in the society, which was something that, different studies would argue and say patriarchy wasn't necessarily African. That in the African society, in some parts of the continent, we had matriarchs, we had more matrilineal lines, or we had strong women that were leaders. But then they attribute the coming of the colonization and introduction of religion and all to one of the contributing factors that institutionalized patriarchy as a norm, and as a form of, as an attitude or a social character or behavior, as a form of living. And over time, it's been quite difficult to deal with the issue of patriarchy. If you want to dislodge that, it's taking a lot more, because it's not beyond the history. There's a socio-political aspect, there's the religious aspect, and there's the economic aspect. Where one, if women, for instance, if we have a wider gender gap, where there are more women that don't have economic empowerment, there are more women that are not educated, there are more women that are dependent on their husbands or men in society, more women not participating in political sphere, because all these things are interrelated. So you look at the different factors that would lead to domestic violence, and how this has sort of given the man that audacity, or created that enabling environment for men to feel it's okay to look at a woman as less than they are, that should be punished. For instance, when you do something wrong, you hit her, or you speak harmfully, you speak to her in such a derogatory manner with derogatory terms, So there are different things that connects, that sort of like enable domestic violence, and patriarchy is one of them. Yeah. So the other, you look at beyond the patriarchy, look at the religious aspect, the place of religion and society, and you'd want to see, because the first thing is, what would make you want to hit a spouse? Normally, some men have argued that men are also victims, which I do not dispute. Yes, we have men that are victims of domestic violence, but the prevalence is we have more women that are victims of domestic violence. And over the years, it's become a huge challenge that even in in marriages, you'd see a victim who wouldn't want to leave such an abusive marriage because one, she feels, my religion wouldn't advise me to get divorced, for instance, or be separated. There's also the other one, the society would look down on me because society does not think you should leave your husband because you were hit by him once. There's also the thing about my children, because once children are involved, oh, my children, I don't want to leave my kids, or I don't want my kids to grow up outside the home. So you look at the different things that hold us together. And why am I relating it to Africa? Because one, our community, let's bring it down to Nigeria, we're very religious, right? So because of that, each time decisions are taken, there would always be consideration to religious beliefs and religious, what would I put it, tenets, or what does the religion say about that? Our community is quite communal in the sense that what happens in society is not just a one man's business or one woman's business. People talk about it in society because we're more communal in the way, in our existence, the way we exist. So that also affects domestic violence. So when you have victims of domestic violence, they're not just thinking of themselves, they're thinking of how does this affect my family? Because if you get married, your family, when they talk of marriages in African communities, you don't say is beyond a man and a woman being one, it's families that are joined together. So you see women that are victims of violence considering, oh, what will my community think about me? What will my family say about me? So they're not just thinking of themselves, they're thinking about the community. And then the fact that you also look at the socioeconomic challenges. You see, when you talk about gender gaps, Nigeria is one of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa that still experiences high rates of gender gaps when it comes to economic empowerment, for instance. So you'd also see a woman thinking, no, if I leave this, or if I do not accept this level of this inhumane treatment, who will take care of me? Who will take care of my children? I don't have a good job to sustain myself and my kids. Or she's also probably taking care of younger ones or families, and maybe this marriage is one of the ways she's been able to do to take care of the family. So you look at from the aspect of the victims, these are the things they consider. Now let's look at it from the aspect of the perpetrator. You see a society that's told the man from childhood, you've been told you're the head, you are the authority. When you say yes, it is yes. When you say no, it is no. You've been told that a woman shouldn't question you. You've been told that taught not to be emotional, not to show that you're angry or that you're weak. When you're hurt, don't cry. So sometimes I feel for the men, because I feel when you have so much emotion, so much bottled up, you can't cry, for instance. Because for me, crying is relieving. Sometimes you cry, you feel better. But you have so much pent-up aggression, right? And then things are not going on in society. Let's say you go out and you just meet the usual frustrations that women will meet, and come back and just about it or cry about it and feel a bit relieved. But you can't do any of those things because society expects you to be a man. And then the woman, you come home and trying to, because you've had so much pent-up aggression, who do you take it out on? The easy victim, who is the woman. So you look at what society has even done to the upbringing of a male child and how that impacts on his life as a man. And then you look at the role of abuse, substance abuse, alcohol and all. That also plays a major part. Then you also look at the fact, I already mentioned the part on the patriarchy, the fact that it's some religion wouldn't frown at a man correcting his wife, even if it has to do with hitting or using derogatory terms. So interestingly, our penal code still has a section that actually permits a man to correct the wife by beating her. The penal code that is applicable in the state in the northern part of Nigeria. And we've been saying these are laws that need to be amended because you don't want any law to create an enabling environment for violence. So you look at the aspect from the man, and then also look at the state. How does state respond to domestic violence? Because it's beyond the home now. Now, if people report domestic violence, are they prosecutions? Are people punished? Are victims granted? Do they have succor? Are they granted justice? Because most times you go to the police, for instance, to make a report, they tell you, this one a husband and wife matter. This is a family matter, and then you are left with yourself alone. Sometimes you even go to report. You see some victims that talk to, they went to report, the police just made fun of them, they went home, the husband beat them even extra on the one they already had. So you look at what are the response, what response do we have, does the state provide to victims? If people are being punished for being perpetrators of domestic violence, that would reduce the prevalence of it. But if you don't have strong state institutions to help protect the victims and ensure that perpetrators are brought to book, you create an enabling environment for that. And then the laws in place. Interestingly, we have the Violence Against Persons Persons Act that was in 2015, and it criminalizes domestic violence. And it's interesting how it even went to define domestic violence, spousal battery, and all. And it also mandates the police to take certain steps when reports are made by victims. But the thing is, normally we have a society where we usually have good laws. We have laws that exist, but implementation and enforcement is a challenge. So sometimes victims don't even know the places to make reports. I was once handling a case of domestic violence, and I remember after reading the woman's case, she already had judicial separation from her husband. And I looked at even the court's judgment on the judicial separation. The court was like, it did not expect a human being to live under certain conditions. The judge was appalled at the facts that were brought before, but the woman did not want divorce because she's a Christian. She said divorce, the Bible does not permit divorce. And she has children, even though she was basically the breadwinner, right? So, but you'd see there was that level, and after the separation, the man, for some reason, found his way back. Now, when we tried to follow up, to make reports, I wrote to the police. Then I said, okay, what we need is just to enforce the court's decision. There's already a decision by the court granting judicial separation. All we need to do is to get this man out of the house. And I remember going to the police and all. It took a longer process. So it was almost, the process itself frustrates even the victim. So you could imagine going over and over again to make a report. So at one point, you just get tired and tell yourself, maybe I should just run away with my children. Or maybe I should just forget about this. And before the police could even help us in fact, at one point, we met a female police officer who seemed very interested in the case. But then this police officer finds out that the perpetrator was an old classmate. And that was how the case could not go forward from there. We had to look for an alternative so far for transfer of the matter. So, you see, when you start dealing with this, and then you go to the National Human Rights Commission where complaints are to be made. Complaints are made there, and sometimes it takes a longer period for response or justice to be done. And you know what they say, justice delayed is like justice denied. So, if you look at all these factors, then you can say, yeah, probably we have domestic violence, which is more prevalent in the African community and the African society.
You talked about the law. Now, putting new laws on the book is not enough. However, even good laws can fail if the legal process is too expensive. Women that are affected by this abuse tend not to have the courage most times to go to the law to report because, one, the law is too expensive, and they decide to own up with the responsibility that let me just stay and die one because religious belief, societal opinion, and what the family will say. The shame, regardless, they prefer to die. What do you think should be done?
So I think that's an interesting question because usually, I know one time I was talking to a victim of domestic violence, one of the cases I was working on some years ago, and I said, why are you not getting a divorce? Why are you still with this man? And she said, you're not married, so you will not understand. And interestingly, I was much younger then. So I'm like, it's not about not being married. So perhaps I can speak as a Christian. For other faiths, we have people that can speak for other faiths. But one thing I told her is, even in the Bible, when they gave advice to men, yes, it said be submissive to your husband. But the Bible was even more strict on men because it said if your husband cannot love you the way Christ loved his church, then he's not even being a Christian because he's failing on keeping to what the Bible has required from him. And that means you don't deserve to be in such a situation. You don't deserve to be in such a situation. So the first thing to do is to protect yourself. And the Bible knows, God knows that as humans, we ought to be selfish first. That's why it said, love your neighbor as yourself. It did not say love your neighbor the way you love God, because it knows that we will love ourselves more than we even love God. He said, love your neighbor as you love, because the Bible, God knows that the way we are created, we are meant to be selfish. So if you can't love yourself, how can you love your neighbor? And loving yourself begins from telling yourself that I shouldn't be treated this way. Because what domestic violence does, it doesn't just affect your physical being. It affects your psychology, your spiritual being. It affects the way you see yourself. Because if you see women of domestic violence, at one point they start feeling like they're less than human. I talked to one woman, and she said at one point she felt the sand she walked on was more important than she was. And that's when I told her, no one should feel that way. Yes, we know that we are dust and also dust to return. But the moment God breathed life into you, you are precious and you are the apple of God's eyes. And don't subject that to violence. Live first. Because you need to be sound physically. You need to be healthy spiritually, physically, mentally, and morally before you can even start taking action. And when your children are involved, the interest of your child, the interest of the children you have should be paramount. No child should live in an environment of violence. Because what you do is you create a situation where your sons think it's okay to be violent against a woman, where your daughters think it's okay to be victims of violence.
Domestic violence goes beyond beating. It falls across forced prostitution, forced marriages, educational institution where a girl is being abused, intimidation at work. Now, as a professional, what advice would you give to the man who commits this abuse against the woman? And what advice would you give to the woman who is a victim? And what advice would you also give to the government? What steps should they take in handling this domestic violence situation?
Perhaps I should start with the victim, because as a woman, I feel more inclined to talk with women and to let them know first, you're not alone. Because most times we have victims thinking that they are alone. They have no one to talk to, no one will listen to them. And I think that's very important, that you're not alone. You have people that can help you. What you need to do is to find out who can help you. And I think my advice to men, perpetrators of violence, is that you're doing this doesn't make you a man. It makes you weak. It makes you a coward, because it means you can't face the situations you're going through. So you'd rather met it out on someone that you live with, or someone or a woman that is around you or close to you. It doesn't make you African, because the African society cares for their women, for their mothers, for their daughters, for their sisters. So you're not even an African man, because you are not promoting the spirit, the African spirit. You know, they say that in Ubuntu. You know, within the African community, we protect our women. Meaning you're not a true African. And then to the state institutions, one, most countries have laws that protect women. We have the CEDAW that most countries are signatories to, and some have actually domesticated it in their society, in their communities. In Nigeria, is the VAP. Even though the VAP is more applicable, it's applicable in Nigeria because it was passed in National Assembly. And then there are different states. I know Lagos State, a different state that actually have laws. And I can't speak for other countries in Africa, but at least I know some constitutions, Kenya, South Africa, Rwanda, they have specific protections, rights that protect the rights of women, constitutions rather, provisions in constitution that protect the rights of women. And in those ways, making it constitutional actually gives women stronger rights, because once it's constitutional, anything you're doing is in breach of the constitution. So there are countries that have taken up laws, passed laws rather, made constitutional guarantees for women. But I think what needs to be, where we need the focus more is on its implementation and enforcement. So institutions that have the power to protect citizens should provide that gender-friendly atmosphere for victims, gender decks to ensure that when women make reports, they are not ridiculed. Police officers should be trained. Every police officer needs to go through a training on gender rights, women's rights, so that a police officer, whether male or female, would understand the dangers of domestic violence and would understand the need to protect victims of domestic violence.
This is where we draw the curtain on today's episode of our program, Matter Africa on Television Nigerian. We discuss domestic violence. I hope viewers out there, you've heard, you've listened, and I hope you're motivated. For women going through domestic violence, please do not hesitate to walk out or probably get help. And when you don't get your help, please kindly walk out and don't get killed. Life is indeed very sweet. You need to live to enjoy your life for your children, for your family, for your friends. And you cannot cut your life short because a man is hitting on you every now and then and you cannot speak up. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of our program. Stay tuned as we come your way again, same time, same station.